This is Michael Woodward, and this is Season 2, Episode 80 of the Jumble Think Podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Jumble Think Podcast, where we interview leading entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we'll share some tips on how you can turn your dreams and ideas into reality too. Today on the podcast, we are talking to Sashen. More about him in a moment. I want to encourage you, wherever you like to listen to your podcasts, head on over there right now and click the subscribe button on the Jumble Think Podcast. If you're a fan of iTunes or Apple Podcasts, it's super simple. JumbleThink.com/iTunes. It'll take you right to the app. You can click subscribe. And for Spotify, do the same thing. JumbleThink.com/Spotify. Now let's jump into today's episode. Hey there, welcome to the Jumble Think Podcast. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have an incredible episode lined up for you today. Before we get rolling, we want to thank today's episode sponsor, OpportunityInChina.com. Here's a little bit more about them.
At the dawn of the 19th century, forward-thinking people moved to the commercial centers of Europe. Moving into the 20th century, America welcomed millions into the land of freedom and opportunity. It is now the 21st century. Many of the successes and fortunes of our generations will be made in China. To learn how you can seize opportunity in China, follow the Opportunity in China podcast. The Opportunity in China podcast is available anywhere podcasts are streamed, or you can visit our website at OpportunityInChina.com.
Today on the podcast, our guest is Sashen. He is a serial entrepreneur who has never had a job. He's a former professional stand-up comic, an award-winning screenwriter, and a competitive sprinter, one of the fastest men over 55 in the country. And he and his wife, Lena Phoenix, co-founded the footwear company Xero Shoes. And they appeared on Shark Tank, where they turned down $400,000 from an offer from Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful himself. So, Stephen, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Yeah, 400,000 sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it?
It sounds like a lot, but I have a hunch that probably in your space, that's not a whole lot of money.
It's not, but well, look, it's a lot of money regardless, but it was just the right thing to walk away from. Although I got to tell you, after the show aired, the number of people who texted and emailed and commented saying, "What are you morons? That's almost $500,000 was, not an insignificant number, but we knew what our yes and no numbers were, and that was nowhere near it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to hold true to what you know is the right value. And in the world of in investing and business, I work a lot with startups, and nothing's worse than taking too much money or too little money to get the deal done. And so for you, I'm sure that number made sense for where you guys were and where you're going. We're going to talk about that and so much more. Before we get going, how you doing today?
It's a Monday when we're recording this, so like all Mondays, I'm like frazzled and trying to do a million things, and then add to it, we have one of our biggest trade shows of the year coming up next week. So, and I just came back from being at an event over the weekend, so I barely remember my own name. So I'm really glad you did the intro.
I appreciate that. If there's one thing that I hear from entrepreneurs over and over again, it's that they're always going, they're always doing stuff. And for you, it sounds like you're in that boat too.
But only for the last 9 years, for 365 to 24/7.
All right. So before we get going into your specific business and getting into some of the topical stuff that we're going to talk about, we got to talk about your journey of entrepreneurship. You talk about the fact that you're former professional stand-up comic, you have done screenwriting, you never had a job, you now have this really cool business, Xero Shoes, you're running, you're doing all this stuff. Where did this all start for you?
Well, when a mommy loves a daddy very much. There you go. So, and actually, I got to tell you, I think that really is an answer. I remember reading years ago that the number one correlation about why someone would be an entrepreneur is that their parents were as well. And as far as I know, I can go back at least 3 generations of nothing but entrepreneurs. And so there's that component. On the athletic side, I didn't know where it came from. I was the only athlete in my family until my sister became a very successful figure skater. But even, that one was kind of a mystery. And when my parents were moving out of their house, I found my grandfather's high school yearbook, and I took after that side of the family. And it said that he was a gymnast. And I said to my mom, "How come you didn't tell me this?" And she said, "I never knew. He apparently never talked about that." So all of it goes way, way back in the family tree, as far as I can tell.
That's pretty incredible. All right. So for you, walk us through that journey of your first entrepreneurial experience where you're starting a business, and a little bit more of that journey, because this is a lifestyle for you. It's not just, hey, I'm going to try this. You're in it. You're doing it.
Oh, yeah.
This is the long haul for you.
Well, I got to tell you, when you said that, the first thing that popped into my mind was a massive flashback to getting something out of the back of a comic book that was a business opportunity. And the business was to sell metallic Social Security cards to replace the paper ones that you had, so you wouldn't lose it and it wouldn't fade or whatever. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And I remember thinking, all right, this is an interesting idea, but there's just no way I could sell that. I can't believe in this enough to go out and sell it. So that was the first thought that popped in my mind. The second was probably from when I was even younger, when my dad, who was a real, what's the word? I can't even think of it. It's appropriate for shoes, not shoe horse, shoe maven, shoe something. He was an Imelda Marcos kind of guy. He really liked shoes. All his shoes were very expensive. And he gave me 25 cents for polishing the regular shoes and 50 cents for polishing the boots. And boy, his shoes clearly got dirty a lot because I was always in there polishing those. So those were my first 2 businesses. The next was I started when I was 12. I was a magician. I did birthday parties for kids' birthday parties. And I did that egads till I was, all through high school and a little bit in college even. And then I became a street performer. I know I'm leaving out things even in that little span of time. But the first business that most people would think of is not even when I was doing comedy, which frankly it's a business. I mean, the same skill set you use to get booked and do your shows and see how it goes and get better. Same thing applies now. Actually, same thing for when I was a street performer. I mean, street performing is an amazing business. Think about this.
Yeah.
You make people stop for no good reason. So you've got to come up with one. You make them stay for no good reason. They weren't planning to watch you, so you've got to give them a reason to stay. And then you make them give you money when they have no reason to do that. And that is an incredible sales job. And you learn a lot about, in fact, I just remembered I was working on a book called something like Everything I Learned About Marketing, I Learned from the Streets of New York, or by being a New York street performer, or something like that. And it was going to be, 10 principles of something or other. And it was relatively straightforward in many ways. But so that was a big deal gig. I mean, I did that for a number of years and did very well at it. I learned my favorite thing. I went to New York. I started as a street performer in Washington, D.C. And when I went to New York, I very quickly had found that people were stealing my act. And I mentioned to this one street performer guy who's really famous, I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Well, write an act that nobody would dare steal."
Yeah.
And so the act that I had was like a little tabletop magic act, and maybe I could have an audience with about 50 people. And I ended up writing a much bigger act where I could have audiences of 500, 600 people. And of course, I went from making, $20, $30 a show to $500, $600 a show. And that was a really big deal. There was only 2 or 3 of us in the city who were making that kind of money. But it was all from the same principles that I use now with our footwear company. So, but the first company that I started was in 1992, 93. Pardon me. I invented what became the industry standard word processing software for film and television writers. And that was because I was writing screenplays and hated the existing software and uttered the 5 dangerous entrepreneurial words. How hard could this be?
Yeah.
And started a software company. And that was just based on an idea that I had that I knew was better and just had to prove that I was right. And I was, and I did.
That's so crazy. Really, really, really cool. All right. So for you, you're not only doing kind of the status quo kind of businesses. You're innovating in those spaces.
Oh yeah.
And innovation is much different than just standard entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
where you go, hey, this is a business. You look at house flipping, and they go, I'm entrepreneurial because I buy and sell these houses and do all that kind of thing. Well, there's models out there. There's probably a billion models for that. For you, as you innovate in these different spaces, how are you getting to the question where you go, this has to change? How can I fix this?
Well, A, it's a good question. And B, I will tell you that I don't recommend this path by any stretch of the imagination. It's more expensive. It's more risky. It's more exhausting. But it mostly comes out of just my own experience. And I wish that I could say there's something other than that I know how and why I get frustrated. And for whatever reason, more than a few times I've known how to solve that problem. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know my frustration is not unique. There's a very common human thing where we extrapolate our own experience to other people, and we're often incorrect. But for whatever reason, for these few times that I've done it, I knew that other people had the same problem I did because I knew what the current solutions were, and I knew that they weren't actual solutions. So it really just came out of, man, this is annoying. Why can't it be simpler or more effective or better in some way that I was able to identify? And I'll tell you one thing, I've actually come up with a bunch of these where other people had developed a product before I was able to, and thank God, because it spared me the hassle of having to do it myself. And there was one recently, actually, about 7 years ago, after I started Xero Shoes, I came up with an idea that was really, really clever. And I tried to find some people to code it. And I thought, this could be bigger than our shoe company. And there's now 5 companies doing this same idea. And they're all running into the same problem that I never anticipated, which is that basically it's a way of using your iPhone to take a couple pictures of your foot and find the right sizing for your foot. And if you do this for a single brand, it can be very effective. But if you try and build it into a whole thing that works for multiple brands, and you can tell someone what shoe is the right size in every different style they could find, it's a real problem that in a way that I never anticipated. And that is, it sets up unrealistic expectations. It makes the customer think that they're going to get a perfect fit. And you could take 3 people with identical feet and put them in the same shoe, and it'll be like Goldilocks about whether it fits or not. So the fact that someone else got to market before me spared me the hassle of discovering that it really is probably never going to work. So I lucked out on that one.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about Xero Shoes in our first segment here. I have not tried your shoes, although I am.
What the hell? I am hanging up right now.
Well, I'm fascinated because I wasn't even aware of them. Now, you kind of do a couple different things. Well, let me back up. I wasn't unaware of them until I heard about you at New Media Summit, which was an event both of us were at. Killer event, and got to connect with you and so many other great entrepreneurs and business owners doing some cool stuff. So I was super excited because not long ago, I was doing a lot of running, and to hear about your shoes and what you're doing, it just fascinated me. I'll be ordering a pair soon, actually, after this interview, and I know which one will be the right one for me. So all that to say, tell us about Xero Shoes.
Well, the gist is pretty straightforward. Your feet are made to bend and move and flex and feel the world. A quarter of the bones and joints of your entire body are in your feet and ankles. You have more nerve endings in the soles of your feet than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. They're made to function. And there's a serious case of use it or lose it. And I was just at an event with a doctor from Harvard named Irene Davis, who showed that if you wear supportive shoes or arch supports, that within 12 weeks, you can lose up to 20% of the strength in your feet.
Wow.
And that's a huge deal. And there's no other part of your body where if someone said to you, we're going to have to immobilize that for the rest of your life, you would say, yeah, that makes sense. But your feet have that story. People think you need support and motion control and all that, because that's what we've been told for the last 50 years based on zero evidence. So that said, Xero Shoes are casual and performance shoes and sandals designed to let your feet work like feet. So they have a nice wide toe box so your toes can spread and relax instead of being squished together. We don't elevate your heel, which messes up your posture. We are low to the ground for balance and agility instead of having a big flared sole. They're super flexible. You can literally roll them up and put them in your pocket because that's what you need for your feet to flex properly. And the soles give you a just right combination of protection from whatever you might be doing, plus still letting you feel the ground so your brain knows how to use everything from the top of your head down to the bottom of your feet. And our soles are backed with a 5,000-mile sole warranty, and they're really lightweight, and so they're perfect for travel, and they're super affordable. So that's the gist of it. What we've done is basically the opposite of what every shoe company has done for the last 50 years. And interestingly, what footwear was like predominantly for about the 10,000 years prior to that.
Wow. That's incredible. All right. So a little bit about me, that some people listening, and we have hundreds of episodes. I haven't brought this up too much. There was a season in my life where I was running a lot. I was doing half marathons, doing long distance stuff. And I did all of your traditional New Balance shoes and Saucony and Adidas and different brands. And I found that there was this movement that came out about probably 10 years ago now of minimalistic shoes. And I tried this Kinvara shoe from Saucony. And all of a sudden, a lot of my issues went away because the shoe was more minimalistic. Tell us a little about how was that kind of a starting point for you when this minimalistic movement started, or what sparked the idea for you or your experience where you went, something's got to change here?
Yeah, I got back into sprinting when I was 45. So that's a little over 11 years ago. And I was getting injured constantly. And a friend of mine who's a world champion cross country runner said, why don't you take off your shoes and see what happens if you run barefoot? Now, I'm a sprinter. Okay. So I run the 100 meters. Indoors, I run a 50 or a 60. The longest I had ever run of my own volition was a mile, and I didn't like it. And my first barefoot run, I was so entranced with the experience and just experimenting with my gait. What happens if I move faster? If I move my legs faster or slower without running faster or slower? What happens if I run faster or slower while trying to move my legs at the same speed? What happens if I land on the ball of my foot or the side of my foot? Or that, just I kept playing with it. It was just so fascinating. We were running on gravel and on streets and on grass and on trails. And at the end of this run, someone had a GPS watch on. And I said, boy, how far was that? And she goes, that was a little over 4 miles. I went, I'm sorry, what? So that just shocked me. And I also ended up with a big blister on the ball of my left foot.
Wow. Now,
many people I have discovered, if that happens or when that happens, say, hey, this can't work or this is complete nonsense because look, I got a blister. I, on the other hand, said, how come my right foot is okay? And my left foot, by the way, my left leg is the one that's getting injured more often. So I wonder what I'm doing correctly with my right leg that I'm not doing correctly with my left leg. And when I did my second barefoot run a week later with this gaping hole in the bottom of my foot still, I thought, well, I'll give myself 10 minutes. If I can't figure it out in 10 minutes, maybe I'll try one more time. But let's just see if I can run without pain, because if I can get rid of the pain, maybe I'm getting rid of the thing that caused that giant gaping hole. So 9 minutes and 50 seconds of agony later, I was just about to give up. And then in the next stride, everything changed. Pain went away. My running got faster, easier, lighter. My breathing relaxed. I mean, everything changed. And I know what I did. I basically did a few things. I stopped what's called overstriding. I stopped pushing and pulling with my feet. My hips got aligned a little better. But more importantly, it just felt really good. And over the next few weeks, I just kept doing that. My injuries went away. I became faster. That's when I became a Masters All-American. And I just wanted that natural movement experience as much as I could have it. So I knew about the Tarahumara Indians from Mexico who run with just a piece of scrap tires strapped to their feet in sandals they make. They're called huaraches, but huarache is just a Spanish word for sandal. And then I made my version of that same idea. Got some rubber from a local shoe repair place, got some cord from Home Depot, found a lacing system that let them stick on my feet. And that's what I was running and walking and doing everything in. And people asked me if I could make some for them. So I did that. And then it was just a shampoo commercial. They told two friends and they told two friends until finally the last straw was a local barefoot running coach who said, I've got a contract to write a book on barefoot running. If you treated this little hobby of yours like a business and had a website, I would put you in my book. And so by that point, I'd built maybe 500 websites. I was an internet marketer since 1992. And I rush home and I pitched this idea to my wife. It's a great idea. I told her and she said, yeah, you are totally wrong. It is a horrible idea and it won't make any money. It's a waste of time, total distraction. Do not do this. And I agreed with her because I'm a good husband. And then after she went to bed, I built a website.
Yeah.
And that's how it all began. And it just took off from there.
All right, so that's super cool, and I love the whole minimalistic movement. I'm a big fan of that kind of movement. There's tons of companies out there that are doing minimalistic shoes.
Yeah, let me interrupt on that point.
Yeah.
What happened actually was the whole idea of barefoot running took off in late 2009, early 2010, right when we started.
Right.
It was totally coincidental.
Yeah.
And we just rode that wave, which was great. But what happened at first was all the big shoe companies were saying, don't do this. If you run without our shoes, you're going to catch Ebola and step on hypodermic needles and your mortgage rates will go up and your kids won't get into college that they choose. And I mean, it was just ridiculous. By late 2010, they were all coming out with shoes that they claimed gave the same benefits with no evidence of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And Irene Davis from Harvard, she breaks footwear down into two categories, well, minimalist footwear into two categories. True minimalist, which is us and a couple of other brands, like 2 other brands. And then what she calls partial minimalist, what I call fake minimalist, which is all the other ones that are using the same language, but they still have too much padding, they still have too much support, they still have too much motion control, and they just use the language. So that shoe that you had, the Kinvara, is one that she would call a partial minimalist. It's a start, but it's so different than what you'll experience if you get a pair of Xero shoes. And what her research shows is the partial minimalist shoes actually can be worse for you than regular shoes.
Wow.
So there's deliberate confusion in the market created by the big shoe companies.
Well, and that was the question I was going to ask you is like, how is what you're doing different than what we see as the marketing tactic of minimalistic shoes?
Yeah.
And I think you answered that, but let's take that one step further. You were sharing there about how it can actually hurt you to have that kind of footwear. What is the science saying? What are you seeing when people are using true minimalistic shoes or shoes that are designed to be more connected to the impact into the ground? What are you seeing about the health benefits of that?
So I'm chuckling because I literally just came back from an event this past weekend. It's called The Science of Running Medicine. And that's exactly what it was about. And so what you see is just walking in a truly minimalist shoe like ours increases what's known as intrinsic foot muscle volume, or basically you get stronger. So your feet get stronger when you use them. This is not rocket science, obviously. But it's amazing that we have to tell people this. Like, if you use your feet, they can get strong. And everyone goes, well, yeah, of course. Like, yeah, but the shoes that you just bought are designed to not let your feet move. Like, oh, right. So that's one of the things we see. A woman named Isabel Sacco in Brazil, she put minimalist shoes on a number of elderly people and their knee osteoarthritis went away. I'm going to give anecdotal information. This is not scientific data by any stretch, but we now have thousands of emails of reviews of testimonials from people saying how their back pain, hip pain, knee pain, plantar fasciitis, patellar tendonitis, all these things went away, similar to your story, actually.
Yeah.
And the reason is really simple. Again, if you let your body work the way it was designed, it can work better. If you get in the way of it, that can create problems. So I'm trying to remember some of the other things other than foot strength. That's kind of a biggie. There's what you see is when you are running in a truly minimalist shoe, there's what disappears compared to regular padded shoes is what's called an impact transient force spike. So when you run in a padded shoe and you land on your heel with your foot out in front of you, there's this very rapid spike of force that comes up and it goes right through all your joints. When you get rid of all that padding, you can't do that because it hurts too much. And so you run with a more natural gait and that force goes away. So what you see is that you end up using your muscles, ligaments, and tendons the way they're designed. So one of the other things they showed was gluteus strength. Your butt gets stronger too when you use your body the way it's supposed to. And I'm trying to remember some of the other research. There was a whole bunch of really fun ones. Mostly the biggest being that impact goes down compared to regular shoes, no matter how much padding you have. And think about it this way. Which do you think will be better at being a spring and shock absorber, something that evolved over all this time for that exact purpose, or some man-made foam that really only works at one speed and one frequency and one weight? I mean, there's never the odds of creating something that can give you all that variable impact, resistance, and resilience in a man-made product. It's just not going to happen. While there are arguments to be made that our body is certainly not designed to be perfect, it's way better than anything we've made to address the things that it does that we think could be improved. Actually, one last thought about that. A friend of mine worked at Nike for 30 years, and he said he and Bill Bowerman spent all that time trying to find a way to improve what the body did, to improve performance, to get more spring, to get more resilience, to get more whatever. And he says, we could never do it. We just couldn't beat what was already built in.
The other thing I love about this is that you see minimalist shoes in the running space, in athletic space, but you don't see them transferred over too much to casual shoes.
No, it's the other way around. It's actually the exact opposite. Here's what's so funny.
Okay.
Think about, well, with a caveat, think about women's shoes in particular. So ballet flats, very popular shoe. There's a shoe style called the Mary Jane, very popular. Sandals, all very much minimalistic if you were a big shoe company, but not truly minimalist. So the idea is there. And by minimalist, all we mean is that really low to the ground, really lightweight. Those are the two biggest things. But what you really need to add, if you're going to use the word minimal or minimalistic as a substitute for as close to natural as possible, you need to make sure that the sole is really flexible, that it fits your foot, doesn't squeeze your toes together, that allows your foot to move naturally, and it allows you to still feel things. If it's missing any of those, it's not the real deal. And even in those women's products where there's been or just flip-flops, there's been something that we could think of as minimalist for a long time. All those products are missing at least two of those features that I just mentioned, which is why they don't give you those benefits, or sometimes are worse. Like women's ballet flats, they squeeze your toes together. And the way that they fit, they don't let your foot actually move naturally. Flip-flops, even worse. The padding is a horrible padding that breaks down. You watch people in flip-flops, you'll see they're falling off one edge or the other, or they're way too big or way too small. And the way you have to grip the thong in a flip-flop is not the way your foot is supposed to move. Or sports sandals like Chaco, Teva, they're thick as a brick. They're not really stiff. They weigh a ton. So those are the problems they have. So the whole thing is, think about what your foot does if you're walking around barefoot, and how close can you get to that while still having the other features that you might want, mostly a little protection from both the ground or the climate.
As we kind of make a pivot towards the end of this segment, we always ask, how are you finding purpose in what you're doing?
Well, I like being right. And, when you look at what the major shoe companies are doing, there's no evidence that what they're doing is right. I've asked developers from major shoe companies, show me the proof that what you do reduces injury and improves performance the way you say it does. And they have never been able to show me anything. One of a guy from Adidas, I did a panel discussion at the American College of Sports Medicine, and there was a guy from Adidas who said, well, doing that kind of study would take a lot of time. It would be really difficult because of all the confounding factors. It would be very expensive. I nearly jumped out of my chair. It's like, you've had 50 years. You're a multi-billion-dollar company, and finding out the answer to this is worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
The idea that you're just not doing it because it's difficult, come on. I mean, ultimately, every shoe right now, mostly performance shoes or athletic shoes, they're based on the exact same idea. Everyone's doing the same basic thing, and it has never worked. So what gives us purpose is again, as I mentioned, the thousands of emails and reviews and testimonials we have from people who use the phrase, "You changed my life." And that is what gets us going. We know we're doing the right thing. And that is a wonderful position to be in as an entrepreneur. It makes you just invulnerable.
Now, for you, what is one challenge you're currently working to overcome in
Money.
the business?
We're growing fast enough that we need additional capital, and we want to grow faster. And that's all, not surprisingly, always the limiting factor. And we're a bootstrap company. We did an equity crowdfunding raise last year and raised a little over $1 million from our customers primarily, which was really wonderful. But to grow, when we've been growing at about 80 to 100% a year for the last few years, and that kind of growth requires capital, and accelerating that growth requires more capital. And so that's one of the big things that's got us hamstrung at the moment.
And what's the next big goal you have for the business?
Taking over the world. That's the only goal we have, really.
Nice.
It's the next, actually, that's an interesting question. What's the next big goal? I think the next big goal is bringing in some additional talent that knows how to run a multinational footwear brand in this day and age. And there's very few people who know how to do that, maybe none, frankly. But we've gotten to the point where we are expanding internationally. We are expanding into retail in ways where Lena and I are smart people, but we are not the best people necessarily. There are people who are smarter than us at the things that we need to do next, and finding them and bringing them on board is probably our next big goal.
We'll be right back with Stephen to go much more deeper into these topics. Chasing big ideas and dreams is overwhelming and can be hard to do, but you're not alone. I want you to take a moment. Think about that thing that you've been burning to do. Maybe it's a new career or a startup or just a fun hobby you want to start, but you're not sure how to get there. The Jumblethink team is here to help you to turn that idea, to turn that dream into reality. Here's what you need to do. Go on over to jumblethink.com/helpme and let's start the conversation to see how we can help you turn your dreams and ideas into reality too. Now let's return to our conversation with Stephen Sashen. We are back with Stephen and Xero Shoes. Stephen, how can people find and connect with you and with Xero Shoes and everything you're doing?
I respond best to carrier pigeon and smoke signals personally. Those really catch my attention. But other than that, I'm available. Xero Shoes is Xero Shoes, plural.com. And we're at Xero Shoes or /Xero Shoes on pretty much every social media platform you can find. And my contact info is, our contact info is everywhere. And my contact info is almost everywhere. So we're a very transparent company. And you can pretty much get through to anyone at the company, including me, by starting at one of those places.
One of the things that, as we were talking before and about different topics we could talk about, and one of them caught my attention. We recently did a podcast episode on don't follow the guru. And I know for you, you're big into saying like experts that are promoting nothing, but you think that they're selling you everything is just so much of a problem right now. Let's talk about that.
Well, give me the Reader's Digest version of what you did.
I just basically said, there's no such thing as experts anymore.
I love it.
Because, the truth of the matter is that in the podcasting space, let's take that as an example.
Yeah.
So often by the time they've achieved their successes, the methods and models that they use to get there are no longer relevant. So for them to teach it, mark it up, sell it, make $1 million off of it, and I know some that have done that, is not really relevant to helping others actually achieve success because it's no longer relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's definitely one of the factors, and that's true in the whole business success category as well, is the universe changes. One of the top correlates between business failure, or one of the top correlates to business failure is that your previous business was a success, because if you were successful before, you think probably it was because of you and your brilliant idea. And when you have a new idea, you're going to think, well, this one feels like that one, so this one's got to be good.
Right.
Maybe that's just not what made it happen. And, I have a master's degree in film, and one of my teachers was the director, Milos Forman, who sadly just recently died. And someone said to Milos once, so how do you make a good movie? And he says, and here I'll do my bad Czech accent. He says, making movies 90% casting, and the other 10% is casting. And I feel that way about business. Like it's 90% luck, and the other 10% is luck. And then there's a whole separate 100% that's working your butt off and trying to be smart and not taking too much risk and mitigating risk and knowing how to handle cash flow and all those technical things that you need to do to run a business. So, but the other problem with the gurus is that typically they're doing something that human beings are designed to do, which is look in the past and try to find an answer to the question that you asked. Now, the problem with that is if you ask the question, why was someone successful? You're now on a hunt for reasons that you can use to justify that question and come up with a story about what led to success. But that's called hindsight bias or survivorship bias, or actually a little bit of both. And so as an example, people love using Apple as an example of what a great company is. They forget that through the 90s, Apple was an example of what a crap company was. Or people used to use an example of Enron being such a brilliant, out-of-the-box, revolutionary new company until it turned out they were just ripping people off and lying, and everything was, went to hell in a handbasket. So because you can come up with a good story, that doesn't mean that it's true or replicable. That's the bigger one. Like someone said to me, hey, you have a chance to come meet Richard Branson. Do you want to do that? And I went, why? And they were like, what? What do you mean? You could learn so much from him. I said, no, you couldn't. Richard Branson is a once in a lifetime kind of guy. And the proof is there's no other Richard Bransons. In fact, if you met Richard Branson, you'd probably come away thinking, even Richard Branson isn't Richard Branson. So, and certainly not the Richard Branson now is not the Richard Branson from 30 years ago that led to the one that's now. So most of the gurus are teaching, like you said, things that are no longer relevant, or they just made up a story. And we love those stories because we want to know, how do I get to that thing that I want that I think is going to make me happy? And if someone tells you that they have the answer to that, we are wired to listen to them and give them money and take their advice, and ignore the myriad cases of when and why it doesn't pan out. And so, I mean, I don't know how many people have been to a Tony Robbins seminar, but I haven't seen another Tony Robbins.
No. So the question becomes, if that's not the path, what is the path of finding or building success in what you're doing? If we can't learn from those gurus?
Well, you can learn from them. You could learn from them if they did something different. If they, instead of asking what did it take to make someone successful in the past, if they asked questions like what leads to failure reliably, that would be a great course. Nobody would take it, but it would be really, really important because you would learn about the fundamental business principles about managing risk, paying attention to your competition, looking at macroeconomic trends. I mean, all the things that are the day-to-day thing that you need to do in a business, those you could prepare for. And that would be a valuable class. But, your question made me think of a time early on when my wife was complaining. She's, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, nobody knows what they're doing. We're making it up every day. Anyone who says they know what they're doing, it's just like you said, they're relying on the past and probably not looking at what's going on right now. If they're trying to replicate what they did in the past, they're screwed. So our job is to walk in every day, figure out what's going wrong or what we need to do next, and then find a way to get there or find a way to fix what's broken. My fantasy is that one day I'll walk in and everything that was working yesterday is still working today. And it's highly, highly unlikely. But there is no path. I mean, this is the thing, is even your question after everything I just said right before that comes out of that same human desire. It's like, well, if that doesn't work, what's the thing that works? No one has an answer to this. There is no answer. You bust your butt, you cross your fingers, you get smart people to help with the things that you're not smart at. You get people who are good at the things you're not good at. You go back to crossing your fingers some more. And, when I started the company, I had a friend who had started and sold 2 shoe companies and made a lot of money. And I said, give me one good piece of advice. And he goes, if someone offers you a lot of cash, take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was it. I mean, that was literally, this is a guy who started 2 major footwear brands. And that was the only thing he could tell me that was useful from his perspective. And I kind of agree.
Yeah. So good. And taking it a step further, I think Steve Jobs is a great example of that. I wonder if he would have been as successful as he was coming back to Apple if he hadn't been pushed out, if he hadn't had those failures, and if Apple hadn't struggled for so long.
Well, think about some of the things he did before he got knocked out. I mean, they were horrible products. Let's not even talk about the Lisa early on, which was a horrible product. I mean, Apple was a phenomenon because of so many things that had nothing to do with Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs was a part of it, but not, look, there are a number of people who are very high up in Apple, and ask them if they think that Steve Jobs was the guy who made it happen, because they were the ones who did the design. They were the ones who did the coding. They were the ones who did many, many, many things, but you never hear about them for crazy reasons. Because look, another thing about human beings, we like to find the person to focus on. Focusing on a company. This made me think of a weird fact. When charities try to raise money for, how do I want to put it, for like starving children in Africa, they learned that what they need to do in the commercials is focus on one kid. Yeah. Because we relate to that person. We have a hard time relating to big groups. We have a hard time relating to companies. When we think about the companies that we have relationships to, we personify them. We think about Apple as a kind of person, IBM as a kind of person, and that's the way we can do it. And when there is a point person, that gives us something to focus on, the way we focused on Steve Jobs, the way we don't have that for IBM. No one has a person for IBM. And part of that is a deliberate plan on their part. And part of it is those kind of people are unusual. So, they don't show up all the time. Again, there's one Richard Branson, there's one Tony Robbins, there's one Steve Jobs, there's one Elon Musk. I mean, while we can make a list of these people and go, look, that's a pretty big list compared to the population of the planet, it's a handful of human beings you could fit around at a booth in a Denny's.
Well, you mentioned there about how failure can be a driving force, and learning from those mistakes, growing from them, and those are the kind of things that you can look back for the future. Is going, well, that didn't work, so let's go a different route. How can we use failure as a catalyst for success?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question. Where I was going with my thing about learn how to fail is simply that if you understand something like being overcommitted
Okay.
financially,
Yeah.
then you can decide how to avoid that. So people approach me on a daily basis looking for my money for marketing things, and they always sell me with the same story. Look how much money you're going to make if you use my tool or my service or my whatever. And I go, I don't care. How much is it going to cost me? What I actually say, and I'll tell you what I say verbatim. I ask people, how quickly and cheaply can I find out if you have your head up your ass?
Mm.
And partly I do that because I want to see how they react, because if they don't think that's kind of a funny way to ask, then I'm probably not going to enjoy working with them, or vice versa. But it's also serious, because the only thing I can have any control over is risk. There's nothing I like less than someone saying, wow, I don't know why that didn't work for you, but thanks for the money. And no one bats 1,000. So because I know no one's successful all the time, I have to work on the assumption that I'm going to be the one where they're not successful. And I want to know what's going to happen in that case. I want to know how much money I'm going to lose. I want to know how quickly I'm going to find out. I want to know how I'm going to find out. I want to know if they're willing to do anything about it. Companies always say to me, well, I can't offer a money back guarantee. I go, you could. If you really believed in what you were doing and you knew your business well enough, you totally could. Especially because these are typically service businesses where the additional cost is negligible, sometimes doesn't exist at all, for like software as a service businesses, for example. So that's one part, is just paying attention to the downside. In terms of using failure moving forward, it's an interesting one. Look, one of the lessons sometimes is cut bait. One of the lessons from failure sometimes is just stop. Just go get a job at Quiznos. Just do something totally different. It doesn't necessarily mean try again. It may mean no. And I don't know how to answer that, of course. But again, and pardon me if I sound like I'm being critical when I say this, but even that question is just sort of the inverse of what do I need to do to be successful? And again, there's just no answer. What I can tell you is, again, this is a cognitive bias that we need to be aware of. We like to hold on to our losers. Well, we don't like to, but we hold on to our losers longer than we should. And we tend to bail out of our winners faster than we should. So one of the things that we need to be aware of in mitigating failure and using failure is the tendency to hold on too long and take a bigger loss than if we had just gotten out quickly. And I am just as much a practitioner of this as anyone. My software company had a very, very bad stretch that frankly is still going on. And the only reason I stupidly, and I'm serious when I say that, stupidly holding on to the company and redeveloping the product, is because I've had so many people, Academy Award winning screenwriters, for example, who say, don't let this die because it's so much better than everything that's out there. It's what I like to use, and I just want you to get some more market share and rebuild it. And the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences said they'd give me a Technical Achievement Academy Award if I did that. And so that's good motivating factor, but it was a really dumb idea. It's cost me a lot of money, and had I cut bait sooner, we'd be having this conversation on my island.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because using that Hollywood kind of image of some of the executives and some of the things that they're doing, there's a lot of people that probably should have been cut long ago that are still running major media outlets that are burying those outlets. I can think of a couple off the top of my head.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. Again, it's just it's for whatever reason, it's a common human cognitive bias that we do that. And the more we become aware of these things that we are prone to doing that work against our self-interest, sometimes it's easier to stop doing them because we just, we hear that voice in our head saying, maybe I should keep going. And then another voice goes, shut up, you idiot.
Well, when should we just
I don't know.
Shut it down, and when should we
I don't know.
push into it? Like, what are the things we should be looking at?
I don't know.
Because we always hear those stories of the people that just pushed a little bit further, and it was years and years and years of suffering, and all of a sudden they're like breakthrough city.
That's because no one likes hearing the stories of people who did the same thing and failed.
Right.
And there's way more of them. Because again, we like to hear the stories that justify our idea that there's some way to guarantee our success and happiness in the future. We're wired to look for that. We're wired to believe there's a way of getting there. We're optimistic creatures by nature, and that can lead to our demise. We massively underestimate the negative repercussions of almost everything that human beings do, and we'll continue to until we blow ourselves up, perhaps. So I wish there were an answer. It's something that each individual has to wrestle with. I think one answer that pops in my head is if you're putting your family at risk, you may want to really think about that. You may want to find another way where you can not put your family in a situation that is causing real problems, and maybe find a way of still pursuing this thing that you want to do differently than what you thought. And again, like you said, people are going to say, but here's the story of the guy who persevered and so and so. Who cares? You're not that guy.
Yeah. As we wrap up this segment, how can people find you again? How can they connect?
Stalking is one way, but I don't recommend it. And another is, I don't know where that came from. Another is find me online. We're at Xero Shoes, Xero Shoes.com, and either at or /Xero Shoes on every social media platform there is. Phone numbers are on our website. My personal phone number's on our website. My personal email's on our website. So just track me down. We're all easy to find.
We'll be right back with rapid fire questions. Today's episode is being sponsored by OpportunityInChina.com. I wanted to let you know a little bit more about Opportunity in China. Have you been looking for a way to change your career or social prospects? Do you see the world around you changing and haven't quite figured out what path to take? Well, you're not alone in seeking opportunity. Visit their website, OpportunityInChina.com, for access to scholarships to attend university in China, or if you have a bachelor's degree already, OpportunityInChina.com provides access to jobs in the educational sector all across China. Working in China is not only often well paid, but it will place you among 1/5 of the world's population, boosting your social network, bringing you more deeply into the story of globalization, and opening doors you never knew existed. So seize your opportunity now. Visit their website for more information at OpportunityInChina.com. By the way, they have a great podcast. So wherever you listen to podcasts, search for Opportunity in China Podcast and check out what they're creating. Now let's jump into rapid fire questions with Stephen Sashen. We are back with Stephen, and we're going to do rapid fire questions. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Yes, I am.
All right, so here we go. What is one tip you'd give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
Get a government job with a pension.
What is one change you'd like to see in the world?
Oh, I'd like people to know how to investigate their own thinking to see if things are actually true rather than just something they believe.
Love that. What do you want your legacy to be?
I don't care.
Where do you find inspiration?
It's something that wakes me up in the morning and makes me go ooh and ah, and I have no idea how that happens.
What is one book you think every dreamer or entrepreneur should read, and why?
Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert, because it will help knock out this one fundamental thing that humans do, is trying to predict the future and how they will be happy or avoid unhappiness, and how bad we are at it, and how we forget how bad we are at it, and how we think that we're special. Because if we met 1 million people who got the thing that we thought would make us happy and found out that they're not happier than we are, we still go, yeah, but if I got it. And that book can help you stop doing that. And that kind of thinking is what often leads us into very, very dangerous, perilous places.
What is one trend you are currently excited about?
Just natural movement, watching how people are starting to wake up to this kind of anti-corporate feeling of wanting to use their bodies correctly, whether it's natural food or yoga or Tai Chi or all these different things where people are starting to stop listening to 50 years of propaganda and start coming back to the basics. I'm part of that and really excited about that.
What is one habit you find helpful in your life as an entrepreneur?
Watching television at night with my wife.
And we've talked a lot about success, but how do you define success?
I don't.
If you weren't doing what you're doing today, what do you think you'd be doing?
finding some other place where people are living and finding something where people are selling consumers a lie based on mythology, and then trying to find a product that pulls the rug out from underneath that.
How do you start and finish your day?
In bed.
What is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
I would love to have. So we're living in a house right now where they won't let me put a hot tub in the backyard. That makes me insane. I want a hot tub.
As we wrap up, what's the final thought you want to leave all of us with today?
Good luck. I think that really is it. Look, again, there's just no secret to any of this. It's trying to get as smart as you can, work as hard as you can, cross your fingers, and do your best to adapt as the universe, whatever that means, as situations change and tell you either, keep going, or you might want to rethink that.
Stephen, thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's been a blast having you on. I can't wait to put a pair of your shoes on my feet and get out there and get some running in. I'm super looking forward to that. So thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Once again, we want to thank today's guest, Stephen Sashen, for taking time out to be on the podcast. Make sure to check out the episode notes where you can find links to their website and social channels. As we wrap up today's episode, we want to thank today's sponsor, Opportunity in China. Go check them out, opportunityinchina.com. Next week on the podcast, our guest is Tom Singer. So make sure to come back on Monday and check out that episode. Thanks again for tuning in today. It means the world to us that you would listen. I would love to hear your stories. Drop us an email, hello@jumblethink.com. Let us know how the podcast is impacting us, what you love about it, what you hate about it, and what we can do to make it better for you. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to encourage you, get out there and do something. A big something, a small something, but something to move those dreams and ideas forward and change the world around you.
Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant. Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.